ask our commentator, Christian Lundahl, to come forward, if he will. I'll give him the mic. He's promised the panel some questions or comments. Christian has already presented on Swedish education, and so I'm sure he brings some interesting thoughts to us.
Well, at least I hope so. Thank you so much, all 6 presenters, for very interesting papers that I just got the other day. So I read them, and I have tried to prepare some kind of coherent comments that sort of give some overarching perspectives on all papers, and then I have some specific questions and comments to all of you. And taking the freedom to construct a comment, and not everything is sort of pinpoint to what you have said, but I think general comments in relation to what you have presented and the kind of research that you have done and are doing. So I will start my reflections departing on Jacques Landier's notion on the aesthetics of politics and the politics of aesthetics. Or in other words, who is given the voice? That is the politics of aesthetical distribution, and what happens in relation to how that voice is represented, the aesthetics of the voice. And I think in particular in relation to giving the child a voice based on archive material, that becomes really important. What's in the archive? Why is it there? How did it come there in the first place? Has it been thinned out in any ways? Which children are given a voice, exist in the archives? Which children continues to live their lives in the archives? And how are their voice in the archives represented? But maybe most importantly, who are not in the archives? Which voices will we not be able to find in the archives? Who are silenced there? And when it comes to children, what aspects of the child is represented and not represented? How children sounded like 100 years ago, we will rarely find in archives. Definitely not how they smelled. Maybe adults' impressions of how they smelled, but the smell we don't find there. Their spontaneous play, talk, etc. we won't find in the archives. Rarely we find pictures of what they looked like in a normal day. We can see how they pose in front of their schoolhouse in a very orderly way, maybe, but their normal look-alike, what they look like, we don't see so much about. And then I also think that when, especially studying children in archives, we run into ethical dilemmas. What responsibility do we have towards the children that in the past definitely did not have the possibility to fill in a consent form, that were forced to give their opinions, to answer on items that led up to them being data in the archives. And in many of these studies might not even have been allowed for today in relation to today's research ethics. I'm not saying that this applies for what you have been doing, but it raised some of these questions of mine. And looking, I was thinking that going back to Ranzier, we have the 2 dimensions of politics here, and I started giving a comment specifically to Annette's and Anna-Kathrin's work. And when it comes to the ways the ways in how children are represented in your data, that in relation to war, I think it's really interesting to reflect a bit on how are children's voice channeled through the adults' view of the world, in relation to which questions did adults care to ask the children when it was wartime. Many of the expressions in your data from the child might not have been spontaneous expressions and thoughts of the child, but seemingly a bit channeled through through the outside world of how children lived during a war. And I think it's really interesting to reflect on that when we construct war history, which you are not really doing, but I think definitely children's view is really worth being in the construction of war history, but when we construct that based on the kind of data that you have, it might already be a bit channeled through adult thinking about how children should think and behave during a war. But still super fascinating data, and I really love to see more about what you will elaborate on this. And I can also send you, I have more detailed comments on the papers that I will send you. And I also thought of this, even if not that super typically related to Anna-Kathrin's papers on drawing, but what kind of voice do we give children when we ask them to draw? I worked in the 1990s on a present research study where we asked school children to draw what they felt like during a day in school, and it was really fascinating. They draw awful pictures of what they felt like, and when we asked them if school really was that terrible, they said, well, of course we exaggerate a bit when drawing, and I think that comes to the freedom you are giving when drawing. So reflecting on the media of drawing in itself, when reflecting on what these images might have meant, is interesting. And also what during the time we asked children to do, or how we train them to think when asking them to draw. It reminds me on the drawing competitions during the World Fairs in the beginning of the 20th century. A very important aspect of that and the introduction of drawing in many countries' school system was to foster aesthetical thinking of not least the appreciation of what's beautiful, what's clean, etc. But also of being free to express your mind as an individual. And working with drawings from an archive perspective, I think really raises some questions about interpretation between the originator and the spectator, and you as a spectator of the spectator. And how can you sort of, you get your own ideas when looking at the children's drawings, but then you also have can have reflections about the adults at the time's view on the children's drawing. So there are many interpretational aspects to think of when working with this kind of material, but also this, I think it's really super interesting. We have a really lovely case there. And then looking at the other side of Rancière's notion of politics, I find some kind of common thread, at least I constructed one, in relation to Andrea Violetta Jensen-Rinskes work. And we start with Andrea and Violetta. You speak of, well, you all speak of kind of agency or acting against structures, being parents or social structures, and all papers really highlight the dialectical power logics of knowledge and of knowledge production. And for Andrea and Viola, your description about using children for the parents' own ideals on social restructuring, I really enjoy reading about that case. I have hard to believe that one of them produced 150 papers and 16 monographs in 2 years. Can that really be true? Impressive in that case, but still, I think they were both very fascinating prodigies. But you write that in the end that they sort of revolt somewhat towards their parents, and in that express some kind of agency. And I wonder when they express their agency revolting towards the parents, don't they just fall back to the structures their more woke parents try to foster them to sort of oppose? And can we then speak of an agency, or is it a super lack of agency? I just thought it was worth reflecting upon. I would say probably they expressed some kind of agency, but the consequence would be going back to the structure their parents would not like to raise them in. And I've seen that kind of effects on friends in the same age of mine, raised in the 70s in Marxist home. When they oppose their parents, they go back to the structure their parents would. So that's I think that's another kind of consequence. When you revolt towards woke parents, the consequence will be different when you revolt towards non-woke parents. Then you are progressive, but when revolting towards already progressive parents, something else happens, and that I found really interesting to think of. And then we have Jen's paper, and I think it really illustrates what I find so fascinating with the testing war and the history of IQ test, that IQ test has really been used as a double-edged sword. It has been used to manifest power positions, but also to oppose power positions. In Sweden we have this, it was called the mental reserve. Statisticians and IQ testers could show that many more pupils had the IQ level to study at upper secondary school, and that was a really, really powerful tool to work for the expansion of the educational system. But during the 20s and 30s in Sweden, low results for children from working class, for example, was used to say that, well, we can't really do anything for them. They are born stupid, so why give them, why waste more money on their education? So therefore, I think in relation to the Spanish case, it becomes interesting to reflect a bit of what was it in the socio-historical context that made it possible for these IQ testers to use the IQ test results in the way they did towards a more progressive education. And then finally, coming to Rinske, and I heard you present on the psychotechnicians before, and I think that you're really progressive in your thoughts about this case, and it's really interesting to follow over the international conferences where we meet, and I think here what's really interesting, except for the case as such, is in your conclusion, where you point to the very specific Dutch conditions of what was it called, Mulder, the slow. Yeah, exactly. And it reminds me about the consensus thinking in Swedish politics, and in general, it says something about the importance of understanding the nature of the nature of the logics of national politics when understanding the development or involvement of the institutions of modernity. How come that the Dutch Psychotechnical Institute did not evolve as successfully? Well, it was partly related to a very specific political condition in the Netherlands. And we had another specific political condition in Sweden that did not allow the Psychotechnical Institute to evolve as good as other kinds of research institutes. And we also got some comments from the audience concerning the local nature of how psychotechnical institutes evolved. So I think that could be really something bear in mind for your future works. So with this comment, I hope that I have provoked some more questions for the audience and reflections from the authors. Thank you so much.
Do we have any responses provoked by Christian?
Well, no, well, yeah. No, thank you for these good observations. With some of the issues you raised, we already aware of. Others are not. So this was very helpful to give us a bit of an input here because this is all work in progress. Some is more progress than other. That was clear, right, from the presentation. So thank you very much. I think if someone else of the group wants to, but we just took note, right? Yeah. Or is there anything?
And the audience is welcome to chime in too. I know we're getting to the end of a long day.
Yeah. No, my only, I would just say that the question of agency is something that we as historians often, we've all had to deal with this in the sources that we find. I thought it was interesting that you were alluding to the fact that we don't know how the children smell or what they sounded like. I mean, there's the whole field of the history of the senses and the history of experience kind of also makes these elements that we might think are not so important actually essential to the way in which human relations and institutions have been historically constituted. So, I mean, I think all I wanted to say was with these questions of agency, questions of experience, whether it's sensorial or whether it's maybe what the children themselves actually thought, these are things that go way beyond the history of childhood, and I think that everybody here has definitely grappled with these issues before.
Yes. Out there? Well, if I may.
Final words to you.
Again, for these very carefully well-prepared papers with ranging widely over national identities, in particular time frame too, shows quite interesting variations and also some pretty sharp focus that you're developing. So good luck with this project, which I think is part of things to come. And thank you all for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.